Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video.
What do you mean you're out of breadsticks?
Freshly grated Parmesan, sir.
Oh yes, please.
Very good, sir. Just say when. Alright, but it's gonna be a while.
Oh, no.
Here we go again with the witch and such. You really should have taken better precautionary measures. Oh well, this time you're being lobbed into ancient Rome, a civilization that, apparently, is always on the mind of any male over the age of 20. But for you, you'll get to live it, or at least try to. Let's see what you're capable of, shall we? You arrive in the year 250, right in the middle of the ominously named Crisis of the 3rd Century, a tumultuous time of terrible turmoil which began a while back in 235 after Emperor Severus Alexander was assassinated. Classic Roman emperor move. After being confronted by Germanic invaders, he, with some influence from his mother, came to the conclusion that violence was not the answer. Instead, he would pay off the invaders to frig off back home. What a great idea, Severus thought. It was not. In response, Emperor Alexander's most trusted military generals didn't appreciate seeing potential funding go to would-be invaders. So, they made a direct deposit of a knife into the emperor's neck. With interest. With him out of the way, the Roman Empire kind of fell on hard times, as empires tend to do when their emperors are killed off. New emperors were coming and going like one-night stands, the military became fractured and weakened thanks to countless civil wars and a struggle for power, and divided empire states took their chances at yoinking some lesser protected land for themselves. All really chaotic stuff, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, here you are, smack dab in the middle of Rome. Actually, you've landed in the Amphitheatrum Flavium, but you might know it as the Colosseum. A spectacular stadium of spectacle where performances like dramatic theater, gladiator battles, and prisoner executions, among other things, took place across hundreds of years. But thanks to defunding and failed upkeep because, yeah, the empire's in crisis mode, events were a lot more rare in the Colosseum during these times. So you're probably good to just leave and... Oh, that's a big guy. You can tell by how big he is. Just look at those muscle veins, the chest hair. The menacing look. Huh, terrifying. Let's see what he has to say.
Alios me provocare audit bellator.
I don't know what you just said.
O portet legere verba.
Oh yeah.
Pugna me bellator. Con prova divitato.
Okay.
Elige divitello.
All right. Let's advertise. Rule 1. The first strike is always precise. Rule 2. The second strike always finishes smooth.
Fabulis sunt vera. Is sentio omnino. Ineluctabilite. Ceres.
Well dang, those are some smooth moves you got there. That was a pretty decent fight with a pretty decent loot drop. But now we have to shift from fantasy to reality. The struggles of ancient Rome were very real. Disease, poverty, and constant war were a daily concern. Do you think you can handle a day-to-day life during one of the most difficult and dangerous times of the Roman Empire? Not like that you aren't. You have to remember that witch interrupted your spaghetti dinner, so you're gonna need to find some food. Traditionally, the Roman diet consisted of a variety of fruits, vegetables, grains, and meats. But you're in the middle of a crisis which includes agriculture. This means that food supply is on the fritz. Some farms have too little water, some farms have too much water. This is too much water! Even fewer have it just right, so food's getting a little scarce. Thanks to widespread civil wars across the empire, many regions have also had their trade routes disrupted, so what little food choices you have are restricted to your immediate area. This of course led to mass malnutrition across the empire, well, mainly for the poor anyway. Thankfully, the capital of the Roman Empire is able to provide some basic sustenance, for a price. So what's on the menu? As for vegetables, you have some choice of greens: parsley, peppers, cabbages and celery, asparagus and watercress and artichokes and lettuce, which is alright for just a quick bite, but you're a dude who needs better food to set you right. Maybe a fig, or maybe some dates, some apples or cherries or peaches or grapes? Breads for sure, there's some here to eat, just don't get your hopes up if you're looking for some meat. Weather and war have fucked up the supply, so these are pretty much all your choices, my guy. Beggars can't be choosers, but I beg you to choose. Survival is the game that you don't want to lose. And if you're looking for a drink to imbibe, have some watered down wine. You should also subscribe. Sorry, got lost in a rhyme scheme there. Anyway, time to make a purchase. Luckily, you have some gold from your previous altercation, and it's plenty to get you by for now, but it doesn't buy what it used to. See, the emperors, in all of their untold wisdom, needed money in the coffers to pay off incredible debts from beefing up the military and keeping peace with foreign entities. In order to do that, they chose to, among other things, devalue the currency by minting coins with lesser and lesser composition of precious metals. This inevitably caused rapid inflation, which is disturbing from both an economic and a fetish standpoint. Hey son, you watching more of them funny history videos? Go to your room. Since you have the cash monies, time to consume some nutrients. Problem is, you're an outsider, and unless you're fluent in the dead language of Latin, you're in a pickle, but you try to communicate with what little knowledge you have of the Latin language. Wingardium Leviosa? Well, that didn't work. You go up to the next vendor and instead just point to what you want. Why speak when your money can do the talking? Nimis pecunium. Yeah, thanks, you too. Alright, now you... Oh no. Your body isn't used to consuming all of that ancient food. Looks like you need to go do some business. In a bit of a sweaty, stinky panic, you manage to find a public restroom. Ugh, it reeks in here. Don't these people have any sense of... Welcome to the Forica, also known as the community turlet. Several holes carved into long, cold marble slabs, perfect for slamming your ass on and expelling your evils. Usually hooked up to a public bath, excess bath water would run along the floor to flush away your densely digested duty poos to a public sewer system, if you were lucky enough to have it actually attached to one. Sure, you could be like them rich folk with their own private bathrooms, but you're not. So instead, you have to make bears with the bros, and you're gonna have to get real friendly cause as you may have observed, there's no toilet papyrus to speak of. No, instead, you're gonna have to ask Claudius here to share the community wiping tool. It's just a sea sponge on a stick. Once you've done cleaning your nethers, be sure to rinse it off in the shallow trough in front of you for the next guy. That's just common courtesy. Now, being a public bathroom and all, you could expect that these places were not the cleanest, and you'd be correct. Excessive buildup of waste not only led to widespread disease, but also dangerous levels of methane. Ugh, Claudius, light a match, dude. Let's try the bath instead. Public baths in the Roman Empire, called thermae, were actually pretty sweet. Available to anyone who wanted a nice refreshing dunk, these bathing complexes were a social gathering spot. They included exercise areas, steam rooms, and sometimes even libraries when you want to read a soggy book. Problem is, you're in a stagnant bath that doesn't get cleaned all that often, and hundreds of Romans use these baths every day, not to mention the fact that there isn't a bar of soap in sight. Romans didn't have soap. Instead, cleaning was done with this monstrosity. The strigil, a bronze tool used to scrape off the day's or week's grit and grime. Just be a little cautious when using it. In order to smell nice, Romans would apply scented olive oils all throughout their nooks and crannies. But now everyone's all slippery and oiled up, so watch your step. With all of that muck just soaking in the water, it's debatable how clean you actually got. Looks like all the Christians are moving in and telling everyone to cover up. What losers. Anyway, let's shimmy on down the road. Just keep your eyes to the skies for any other citizens who are emptying their festering chamber pots into the street. It's gonna be raining cats and logs. Oh yeah, you're definitely gonna be catching some sort of... I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that an overcrowded and filthy city tends to be riddled with disease. Just look at modern LA. When it came to ancient Rome, the most common diseases were influenza and tuberculosis, as well as some STDs, but you're a good person who's waiting for marriage or proper emotional or monetary compensation before you explore that route, right? Right, so despite these common diseases, Rome would often be smacked in the face with various plagues. The term plague here meaning big bad unknown disease that killed a lot of people. They were plagues, just not the plague. This one is the Plague of Cyprian, named so after the Bishop Cyprian who wrote about the plague in fine detail, especially the symptoms. He wrote that the plague caused exhaustive diarrhea, a swollen and sore throat, constant vomiting, bloodshot eyes, loss of infected and putrefied limbs, paralysis, deafness, and blindness. All of these symptoms add up to one dead fella. Because of the bizarre symptoms, which don't point to any one known disease in particular, historians are still unsure what this plague actually was, but some suspect either the Ebola virus or smallpox. Regardless, the Plague of Cyprian devastated the Roman Empire. At its height, the plague was estimated to be killing off about 5,000 Romans a day. This crushed the Roman military, opening up opportunities for possible invasions, which of course would crush the Roman military even more. Local farms were abandoned, and since trade routes were still cut off due to internal clashes, famine became the new hot commodity. Entire cities saw rapid declines in population, the most notable being the city of Alexandria, Egypt. It sustained a 62% drop in population between the years of 249 and 262. This was caused by citizens either fleeing or dying, or both. So it looks like tons of people are leaving Rome. This can't be good. You're also down to your last few gold oh, yeah. Crime's a thing. Oh well, I'm sure that guy will get what's coming to him.
Stop!
Well, now you're just straight up out of money. Looks like you need to get a job. And you know what's hiring the most right now? The military. So you go up to a local guard and you ask them to join. I join as militum? Yeah, sure. Success! The guard gives you a quick once-over to make sure that you're cut out for the job. In order to join the ranks of the Roman military, you needed to meet some criteria. You must have been at least 5'7", between the ages of 17 and 23, and physically fit. Oh yeah, and a guy. Sorry ladies, you're not allowed to die for the empire, just with it. Welcome to the military. Now, when you imagine a Roman soldier, you might think of this kind of a guy. This is a centurion, a highly trained and high-ranking commander, which is something that you'll never be. Instead, your aspiration should be lowered to that of a typical foot soldier. Sure, it's not as glorious, but these were the muscle of the Roman military. After months and months of rigorous and extremely taxing training, including combat and unit formation, you've been given the privilege of being javelin fodder for the Roman Empire. Here's your complimentary gear, generously provided by the taxpayers. Your primary weapon is your trusty gladius, a 24-inch steel short sword. Your secondary is your pugio, a wide flat-bladed dagger for when you want to remind your enemies of personal space. You're also given a pilum, a pretty sweet javelin, and it does this. Pretty neat, huh? It was kind of designed to be a one-and-done type weapon, used to pierce enemy armor or get stuck in their shields, rendering them useless. Typically, a pilum weighed about 2 to 5 pounds, so they were pretty easy to lob at the enemy. As for armor, foot soldiers in the 3rd century typically wore lorica hamata, a bronze and iron chainmail shirt which offered great protection against slashes and cuts, just not so much against the stabbing. In addition, you were given a scutum, a large wooden round shield for protection against projectiles and parrying the enemy so you can scoot them back. You also have to protect your dome, so make sure you grab a helmet. In addition to protecting your melon, these also protected the back of your neck as well as your precious cheeks with tieable cheek guards. Now, you're ready to fight. Time to head west to the front lines. Since it's the year 250, the Roman Empire faces a terrifying foe. The Goths. Truly barbaric people that have the gall to invade the Roman Empire. For the sake of brevity, they hate you because they ain't you, so their goal is to take everything you have, just as long as they're back in time for their moms to pick them up from the mall. You spot one of their many headquarters in the distance, but you'll never break through their front line, unless you're able to build up enough speed, but how? There! Can you do this? Yes, you have to. For the Empire. Carefully position yourself, you turn around, and... Oops, wrong angle. Just say when, sir. Secret government conspiracies. Alright fellas and fellettes, let's kick this off with something silly. Way back in the late 90s, when my biggest problems were nothing more than navigating the Ocarina of Time water temple and keeping my Neopets from starving, the rest of the world had real problems, like nuclear problems. Big nuclear bomb problems. The biggest players in the nuclear game were Russia and the United States. A small handful of countries had their own too, but they weren't taken too seriously. In order to keep things relatively peaceful, both the US and Russia agreed to minimize their nuclear stockpile and stop irradiating random corners of the globe. Now everyone could sleep soundly knowing that it was far less likely for someone's sweaty little fingy to be hovering over a launch button at any given moment. But what if a less friendly country developed the technology themselves and used it as a last resort to end life as we know it? Your best move would be to proactively prevent that development, or at least severely hinder it. Well, that's exactly what the US tried to do in 1999 when it developed Operation Merlin, a covert CIA operation aimed at sabotaging any possible nuclear weapons development programs in foreign countries, specifically Iran. Why Iran? Simple. They don't like the US and the US doesn't like them. But what do you expect given the fact that the US overthrew the Iranian government in 1953 because of oil? Fast forward to the 90s and trade sanctions and terrorism have caused both countries to put them on edge. But the Iranian government wasn't dumb. They knew full well that a nuclear warhead or 10 would quickly convert their country into a glass parking lot. So in order to level the playing field as well as any opposing military, they would need to develop their own weapons of mass destruction. So whispers of an Iranian nuclear program began to make their way over to the States. No concrete evidence, of course, just a hunch. But just the fear that Iran would develop its very own shiny nukes and gain a seat at the big kids table was enough motivation to intervene. Hey, nice missile. Don't touch. Which brings us back to Operation Merlin. Now the plan here was to have US nuclear warhead blueprints accidentally make their way into the hands of Iranian officials. These plans, however, were sabotaged, sprinkled with tidbits of completely wrong information designed to mislead Iranian researchers down a rabbit hole of designing inherently flawed weapons. Imagine you were taking a complicated test. With just 5 minutes left, you realize, oh no, there's a back page. Your blood runs cold as your pupils quiver in fear. Your pores pour profound portions of perspiration from pecs to pelvis. Just then, a soft sound licks your wax-impacted eardrum. Psst, here, your classmate yells. He hands you an answer sheet. You blush blushingly. With this presumably correct information, you manage to finish the test. And then you explode. Alright, that might not be the best analogy, but you get the idea. In order to actually carry out the plan, the CIA needed the delivery boy, which came in the form of a freshly defected Russian nuclear scientist. Plenty of those walking around thanks to the USSR just having recently bath-bombed away. This scientist would be given the flawed blueprints to a TBA-480 high-voltage neutron initiator, basically a nuclear bomb's firing pin. The blueprints would be sold to the Iranian government under the guise that they were stolen. But here's the problem. A lot of the details of the operation were on a need-to-know basis. Well, you'd think that the fella actually handling the plans would be given most of that information. He wasn't. In reality, the scientist was only given instruction to sell the plans to Iran, and he didn't know that the designs had been tampered with. So when he went to review the blueprints himself, he noticed some issues. Blueprints wrong. I fix. Yeah, in an innocent act of good faith, the scientists had ironed out the design flaws and proceeded to hand over the now correct blueprints to the Iranian government, unintentionally thwarting the US's whole operation.
You what?
That's right, the American attempt to derail the Iranian nuclear program had completely backfired and may have actually helped their nuclear research in the long run. But it has to be said that Iran is not known to possess any nuclear weapons in the current day, as far as we know. The only reason we know about Operation Merlin is thanks to former CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling, who leaked information about the mission to a New York Times journalist in 2003. He got a 3.5-year prison sentence for that little stunt. Operation Mockingbird should be no surprise to anyone, especially nowadays. A couple of years after the end of the critically acclaimed sequel to World War I, previously alive President Harry Truman established the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, for the sake of upholding American national security. And by national security, this meant just shooting ropes of American influence across the globe to protect American interests. Interests that would soon be threatened by the Soviet Union. Having just fought side by side as allies in World War II, both the US and the USSR quickly turned on each other thanks to ideological differences, thus kickstarting the Cold War. The USSR scrambled to establish a geopolitical foothold in now German unoccupied territories across Eastern Europe. You are German now. Okay. Now you Soviet. Alright. Not only did this grant the USSR expanded access to natural resources, but it also provided a sort of Ferris sheet, if you will, of communist countries around the motherland's Western Front. The United States, having just witnessed the abhorrent conditions under Stalin's totalitarian control, was all absolutely not, and sought to prevent any of that smelly communist influence from leaking across the rest of Europe. Alright, which one looks better? No, come on, Poland. Focus. But the very last thing the US needed was to have communistic influence take root and grow from within. So in order to stamp out that possibility, the US government needed to remind Americans just how good they had it. Capitalism good, communism bad. Enter Operation Mockingbird, a covert CIA operation designed with the goal of steering public opinion away from any communist influence. But a direct in-your-face approach wouldn't do the trick. This needed to be more subtle and appear to be coming from multiple trusted sources. The more widespread the idea, the easier it is to believe. Now you have to admit, the general population is easily swayed. That's why political campaigns work. But back in the 1950s or so, access to information was nowhere near what it is today. So many messages were taken at face value by the vast majority of Americans. If you heard from your favorite news sources that millions had died under Stalin's communist regime and that communism was spreading to the US, you're gonna shit a brick. If your favorite movies portrayed communists as evil little minions who want to steal your freedoms, you're gonna be one pissed off Polly. The only good commie is one that ain't alive no more. I'll work on that later. There's probably no better way to control the masses than by fear and anger. Under Operation Mockingbird, the CIA had infiltrated the majority of the US's main media outlets, including news broadcast stations, journals, magazines, newspapers, movies, and radio, planting anti-communist propaganda and focusing the narrative on good old American values. The CIA had hundreds of members of the press, including many higher-up publishers and editors from across the nation, secretly on the government payroll from the 1950s to the 1970s. These reporters and journalists would discreetly gather information about public opinion and disseminate CIA-authored pro-American, anti-Soviet stories, even if they were a bit over-exaggerated. It was essentially the country's first wide-scale fake news factory. If you read any kind of news article in the time, chances are it was written, or at least heavily edited, by the CIA.
You are fake news.
The anti-communist propaganda had caused mass hysteria across the US, resulting in incidents like the Red Scare, which had Americans pitted against each other. You just never knew if your friendly, well-groomed, handsome neighbor was secretly a communist sympathizer.
Oh, hey, Todd. Yeah, I'm just watering my flowers, making sure they're all getting watered equally. I bet they'd probably water themselves if I gave them the hose.
By the 1970s, Americans started to actually think a bit for themselves. With recent disasters like the Vietnam War and Nixon's Watergate scandal, government trust was in a bear market, and the public was buying puts. As an execution of checks and balances, the US Senate had unanimously approved the formation of the Church Committee in 1975. This committee, which consisted of 11 politicians and lawyers, was tasked with exposing the many suspected abuses of the CIA. And with their research, they blew the whistle on many of the CIA's horrid atrocities, bringing them right into the public spotlight. These included the notorious Project MKUltra, various assassination attempts on foreign leaders, attempts at overthrowing foreign governments, and of course, Operation Mockingbird.
So, what do you have to say to accusations of CIA propaganda? I'd say that you could take a propaganda at my asshole, Senator.
After the jig was up, the CIA claimed that all operations had ceased on the Mockingbird front, but of course, we know that that's not true. Nowadays, every one of us has access to more information than we could possibly process in a lifetime. Each article, video, post, blog, algorithm, just a potential gateway to subliminal messaging and swaying our decisions. Operation Northwoods is one of those things where you'd ask yourself, the US government wouldn't really do that, would they? Yes. Yes, they would. Back in 1959, communism had hit too close to home for the United States. Just outside the Gulf of whatever this is now, trouble was a-brewing in Cuba. That would be the Cuban Revolution, headed by this scraggly little scoundrel. Having just overthrown a corrupt, fascist, and US-approved government rife with economic inequality, Castro sought to even the odds for his fellow Cubans moving forward. His answer? Communism, specifically the Marxist-Leninist flavor. But no matter the type of communism, the US wasn't too keen on having a communist nation a stone's throw away from the tip of its dongle. It also didn't help that Castro had seized control of all American businesses in Cuba, including sugar and coffee plantations and oil refineries. In response, five-star General President Eisenhower had slammed the communist government with strict restrictions on trade and vowed to cast Castro aside. But that was another president's job. In 1961, shiny new President John F. Kennedy had attempted to huck Castro out of Cuba with the Bay of Pigs invasion. A group of about 1,500 anti-Castro Cuban revolutionaries were taken in, trained, and had millions of American dollars worth of military equipment thrown at them. Here, go kill Castro. And so they tried. The Bay of Pigs invasion, though, was an embarrassing failure. The Cuban military, over 200,000 strong, completely decimated the paltry invading force in just a few days. Now, having just warded off what he knew was essentially a US invasion, Castro felt a bit big in his britches. The US needed a better plan, but they were limited with what they could actually do. Since Cuba was buddy-buddy with the big communist motherland, a direct invasion by the US would almost certainly mean a Soviet invasion in Europe, so President Kennedy needed to really use his head for this one. But it was actually his brother that authored a solution. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy developed Operation Mongoose, a covert CIA operation designed to take down Castro's Cuba from the inside. CIA-funded Cubans would be recruited in Miami and dumped in Cuba to form a revolutionary militia. The US would influence political support for the would-be revolutionaries, which would lead to an eventual coup and usurp Castro, giving the US the chance to shape the government however they wanted. But a key part of that plan was to convince other nations that Cuba was wild, irrational, and dangerous, to the point of supporting US intervention. This is where Operation Northwoods comes in, a proposed CIA covert false flag operation aimed at executing domestic and foreign acts of terror against innocent civilians in order to justify aggressive US military action against Cuba. Some of the proposed terrorist acts included destroying a US ship and conducting fake funerals, attacking Cuban refugees seeking haven in Miami, planting plastic bombs in strategic locations in Miami, destroying Dominican Republic crops and planting false evidence, and staging attacks on US aircraft. And the list goes on. But the most damning evidence comes straight from the source. Here's an excerpt from the declassified Operation Northwoods document, highlighting a plan to fake a plane hijacking. Hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft should appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela. The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday. An aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft. The duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual registered aircraft would be converted to a drone. The document goes on to explain how both planes would follow the same flight path, with the duplicate passenger-carrying craft secretly landing and safely evacuating all passengers. This plane would then be reverted back to its original appearance. The original empty plane would then continue its flight path over Cuba. Once in Cuban airspace, fake pilot radio transmissions would play, declaring that the plane was under attack by Cuban aircraft. The transmission would then be cut off by the plane's remote detonation, simulating its destruction by Cuban forces. The culmination of these events would undoubtedly rally Americans against the Cuban government, justifying and essentially greenlighting an American invasion. But then a little thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. Turns out that the Soviet Union had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is hilarious, because the United States secretly installed nuclear missiles in Turkey. This was the closest the world ever came to an actual nuclear apocalypse. In order to avoid mutual destruction, the Soviets agreed to dismantle their nukes under the condition that the US dismantled their own nukes and cease all military aggression against Cuba. And with that agreement, Operation Mongoose was terminated and Operation Northwoods was shelved, hopefully never inspiring any future events. Operation Paperclip. Even if you're not a history junkie, you've probably heard of this. This is where US government ethics completely disintegrated like a big green fart in the wind. The Second World War wasn't one of just military strength, but of cunning, intelligence, and ingenuity as well. Emerging technologies gave each side advantages on the war front. The UK with its code-breaking Colossus computer, Germany with its devastating V2 rocket technology, and of course the US with its catastrophic atomic bombs. Nazi Germany had some of the greatest scientific minds of the modern age. It's an indisputable fact. And after Germany's surrender, the US wanted to leverage that expertise for its own technological advancements. Of course, there was also a concern that the Soviets would attempt the same thing, so it became a matter of national security. Well, the Soviets did end up yoinking over 2,500 scientists and various equipment for themselves under Operation Oswiecim, but no one ever really talks about that. In July of 1945, a mere 2 months after the Main Mustache himself downed a pill and a bullet, Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip, had commenced. An operation designed to scoop up Nazi scientists from Germany, seize their research and technologies, and grant them asylum in the US so they can help develop weapons against Japan, who was still very much determined to win the Pacific Theater. Something they'll retrospectively regret in about a month. Most of the scientists recruited were experts in the fields of rocket science, aviation, and chemical and biological warfare. Over 1,600 Nazi scientists were recruited into the American scientific community and given research jobs. That would be a hell of a resume. Okay, looks like it says here you held a position for a bit in Auschwitz, hope I'm saying that right, as a camp counselor. Why don't you tell me more about that? No, that's okay. Operation Paperclip had absorbed some of the most prominent figures of the German scientific community. For example, you had Hubertus Struckhold, an aeronautical medical researcher. He was recruited into NASA and went on to design critical astronaut protective equipment for various spaceflight missions. During World War II, however, he was complicit in several human experiments at the Dachau concentration camp. There was also Heinz Haber, an aeronautical physicist that also participated in human experimentation efforts to further his research. Haber eventually became the chief scientific consultant for the Walt Disney Company in the 1950s. And of course, there was former SS officer Werner von Braun, Germany's leading rocket technology engineer who helped design the V2 rocket through brutal slave labor. He became a NASA director and one of the most prominent figures in the American space frontier. He also worked with the Walt Disney Company to popularize the subject of human space travel. With American scientists now welcoming their new, funny-talking coworkers of questionable origin, the US had some cleaning up to do. See, the American public had zero knowledge of Operation Paperclip's existence, so it was up to the government to rebrand these Nazis as good old wholesome geniuses who all coincidentally wave at a 45-degree angle. Histories were hidden and war crimes were scrubbed for the sake of technological progress. And boy oh boy was there progress. With the help from the Germans, the US made unprecedented breakthroughs in aeronautical technology, largely contributing to the US's success in the space race against the Soviet Union with the Apollo missions. Over the following decades, however, many of Operation Paperclip's beneficiaries found themselves in the crosshairs of American journalists. Previously buried pasts were soon dug up, and links to war crimes were being reconnected. Fearing persecution and eventual prosecution, many of the scientists got the hell out of the US to seek refuge elsewhere. Although rumors of paperclips circulated as early as 1946, the official documents were formally declassified under President Clinton's Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act of 1998. Pretty messed up, right?
The silliest deaths in history. Part 2.
In a world of constant scientific revolution and innovation, it's required that any new theories be put to the test with reliable and repeatable proofs. Otherwise, you're about as useful as a flat earther. But sometimes that proof puts people in harm's way. Take for instance, one Jesse William Lazier. This handsome block of cheddar was an American physician in the late 1800s, though he did live to see the new century, just not for very long. But we'll get to that in a bit. Growing from a well-to-do boy into a well-to-do man, Lazier had a passion for helping the ill and minimizing all of the icky sickies that had plagued humanity throughout history. So he took that passion and put it to good use, receiving his doctorate in medicine from Columbia University in 1892. Upgrading himself from graduate to practicing physician in 1895, Lazier focused his studies on two major diseases, the infectious malaria and the deadly yellow fever, both of which were stirring up all kinds of problems in the late 1800s, the worst of which being that people were dying. But exactly how these diseases were being spread so easily, particularly in the southern United States and in the Caribbean, remained a mystery, for a few more years at least. Well, that's not exactly true. You see, about 14 years earlier, Cuban public health professional disease researcher guy Carlos Finlay came up with a theory. He proposed that some diseases, particularly yellow fever, could be transmitted through the bite of a single infected mosquito. It's a rather simple theory. An itty-bitty mosquito bites an infected monkey, acquires the yellow fever, flies away, finds a healthy human, gives the suck and leaves behind yellow fever, and the cycle continues. Now, if you've ever spent more than 2 seconds in the American South, you know just how bad them little shits can get. So if there's a few infected people and a lot of mosquitoes, things are gonna spread faster than a bad joke at a dad convention. Oh, come on, I'm hungry. He said it. Finlay laid out his research and presented his nido-mosquito theory to the scientific community, opting for control over the mosquito population to minimize the spread. And they all laughed at him. All them stupid science bitches ridiculed and mocked Finlay's theory, brushing it off as complete nonsense. But now we fast forward more than a decade, and a very confident Lazier was willing to put that theory to the test. On himself. Right here's an infected skater, and here's an uninfected me. So, if it bites me and I get infected, well, there you go. And so, in September of 1900, Lazier was deliberately bitten by an infected mosquito. He contracted yellow fever and died several days later. But his sacrifice would not be in vain, as it confirmed Finlay's theory, subsequently revolutionizing the control of yellow fever, including controlling the mosquito population. The age of exploration saw a lot of exploring from many a capable sea captain. But amongst the Columbuses and Marco Polos of history, some have fallen through the cracks, their deeds and accomplishments forgotten to time, or just not important enough for people to care. Johnny Kendrick was one such captain. Ever since growing up aboard Papa Kendrick's whaling vessel in his teenage years, John had a love of the sea, which explains the vast success he found in his later years. This guy was more American than a strapped apple pie asking for a tip. A member of the American Sons of Liberty, Kendrick personally took part in the famous Boston Tea Party, hucking countless crates of precious British life fuel into the harbor. He also commanded a privateer ship during the American Revolution, attacking and capturing British warships with his crew of 104 men, even going as far as helping convince the French to join the fight. After helping America get its independence, Kendrick took to the seas once more, this time on a more exploratory venture. Teaming up with famous explorer ship-sailing captain fellow Robert Gray, whom you've probably never heard of, the two bros made history, leading the first US expedition to the Pacific Northwest, where they established a strong fur trade route. This was mainly trading goods like mirrors and knives to purchase sea otter pelts from local natives. Hey, gotta do what you gotta do, you know? Kendrick also made himself at home in Hawaii in the late 1700s. There, he built up a pretty lucrative sandalwood trade hub, harvesting the wood in Hawaii and shipping it off to China, who treasured the luscious lumber for its durability, medicinal and therapeutic properties, and of course, its smell. Oh, that's good wood. So Kendrick spent many a year just jamming as much of his wood as he could into China's supple trading ports, skipping back and forth across the Pacific Pond between mainland China and the Hawaiian Islands. But Hawaii, historically speaking, often had a bunch of fighting between chiefs of the different islands. Each chief, understandably enough, wanted to expand their respective territories and influence. Well, when returning to the islands in 1794, Kendrick found Hawaii to be in complete turmoil, with two chiefs duking it out to be the big chief in charge. One of the tribes was being supplied by Captain William Brown, a proper Brit who was willing to get some land for the British crown. Kendrick replied he too supplied a chief of great renown, and put to the test Kendrick did his best to smack the captain down. So in December of 1794, a battle commenced with Captain Brown supporting the chief of Oahu and Kendrick supporting the chief of Kauai. How cute. The tropical tussle ended with Kendrick's side being victorious, inspiring him to celebrate the only way a true American knows how: by firing off loud guns. As planned, Kendrick's ship had ignited a volley of cannon fire. Although his side had lost, Captain Brown, determined to uphold proper British etiquette, agreed to discharge a volley of his own cannons in Kendrick's honor. Oh, this turtle soup is to die for. Well, that's what you get for slurping your soup. Ugh, turns out in a complete honest mistake, Captain Brown forgot to unload shot from one of his cannons before firing it off. Some historical accounts claim that grape shot tore through Kendrick's cabin, creating complete chaos and quickly killing the competent captain as he crunched on a collation of consumables. Oh, sorry about that, it's completely my fault. Yep, that Jack Daniel, the two first-name having freak who founded the famous Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey Company. You know, that succulent spirit that did, will, or is getting you through those tough college days or life in general. That's the one. Well, little Jackie Boy was born in Tennessee in the mid-1800s as the youngest of 10, mainly because his birth was the one that sent his beloved mother skyward. Very sad. Now, unfortunately, not much is known about Jack's early life because them town records don't went caught fire. Most of the insight that we do have into Jack's life actually comes from the Jack Daniel's Company historical records. Teeny Tiny Jack, the youthful entrepreneur that he was, yearned for work at the ripe old age of 8. The man to answer Jack's call was this guy, Dan Call, a preacher, a screecher, and one distilling creature. And of course it would be here that Jack would find his calling. Something about Jack caught Dan's eye, and he saw real potential in the little tyke. This boy's gonna make a fine whiskey one day, I tell you what. And so, according to company history, an 8-year-old Jack began learning the art and science of distillation from one Nathan Green, a master distiller and slave under Dan Call. Fast forward several years and Dan hit a crossroad. Given an ultimatum by his wife, Dan had to choose between his relationship with his tasty spirits or the Holy Spirit. The Reverend chose his Lord and Savior, saving his soul and his liver in the process. In that choice, Dan had sold his prized distillery to none other than his favorite pupil, Jack Daniel, whose first act as new owner was to hire on his friend and mentor Nathan Green as the company's master distiller. He also employed Nathan's 2 adult sons and, later down the line, his grandsons. Now, the Jack Daniel's website really emphasizes that Jack never owned slaves. So if you disagree, don't look at me. I'm just a guy on the internet. A man of all business and no pleasure, Jack never married nor had any children of his own. He did, however, take his nephews under his wing to learn the business, eventually handing the distillery down to them in 1907 once his health bar had reached a solid yellow. But it would be a few years later in 1911 before Jack would kick the bucket, or in this case, something much heavier. According to legend, Jack Daniel, now in his 60s or so, had forgotten the combination to a personal safe housing a bunch of valuables like safes are typically designed to do. In his frustration, Jack tried to solve the problem in true US Southerner fashion, by putting a boot up its ass. But since a safe has buns of literal steel, Jack instead broke his toe, causing a severe blood infection. Jack Daniel reportedly died of blood poisoning on October 9th, 1911. But, is this story true? I don't know. Here's a rather recent one for you. Back in 1993, when the world was witnessing the birth of the internet, Czechoslovakia was checking out, and President Clinton was gearing up to suck or be sucked at his job, Gary Hoy was about to meet his untimely death. An extremely successful business partner and corporate and securities law specialist for the Holden Day Wilson law firm in Toronto, Canada, Gary was living it up. But he would quickly learn that it's a long fall from the top. Gary had a reputation as a very personable guy, always loving to talk to people, share wisdom, and loved cracking a few jokes here and there. But on July 9th, 1993, one of Gary's jokes would fall flat. While attending a reception in the office on a Friday, Gary decided to give a tour of the office to a group of accounting and law students, which of course was a typical routine for Gary's charismatic character. But what happens next would be cemented in the minds of everyone around him. While on the tour of the 24th floor office, Gary decided to whip out his signature move. Boasting about the structural integrity of Canadian architecture and the seemingly unbreakable glass office windows, Gary charged full speed towards one of said windows, a party trick he apparently had performed successfully many times in the past. Typical Gary. But this time, he was also successful. Gary bounced right off of the glass without a hitch, to the applause and laughter of the students. Y'all wanna see me do it again?
Yeah!
No, not really. Gary was about to push his luck, and a little too hard on the window. Gary charged once more, hitting the glass at a sprint. Now, to his credit, the glass didn't break, but the entire window frame dislodged from its setting, causing Gary to plunge the full 24 stories to his death. The students and various colleagues stood paralyzed and horror-struck after witnessing Gary's fall, not to mention the witnesses on the ground where Hoy's body had landed. Following the incident, many of the firm's lawyers received professional counseling, but some chose to part ways with the company, eventually leading to its full closure in 1996. Talk about having a falling out. Each of us wants to accomplish our own big motivational concrete goals before crossing the eternal finish line. A loving family, traveling the world, subscribing to this channel, which you can do right now. But as the Rolling Stones once said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, I forget the rest. Anyway, this is Frank Hayes, and he has his own goal, to win a race. A horse race. Problem is though, he is no professional jockey. A young Irish fella born in Ireland in 1901, Frank grew up as a stable boy and eventually an apprentice horse trainer under James Frayling, a wealthy gent who owned and bred professional racing horses. Paying close attention to Frank's rather small stature, Frayling gave Frank an opportunity to race as a jockey. And he lost. But apparently not too bad, because he was given a second chance in 1923. One small snag in this plan, however, was that Frank was a tad too heavy. Jockeys were required to weigh less than 130 pounds in order to qualify for racing. Ideally, the slimmer and sleeker your jockey is, the less of a burden he is for the horse, allowing for a higher potential speed. Less mass, go fast. And so Frank was given a doozy of a task. Lose 12 pounds in a few days. And that's a big ask for someone already in a healthy weight range, but Frank was determined to strap in the saddle once more. Through what I can only imagine were extremely unhealthy choices, the frail Frank ended up making the cut, and was given the thumbs up to participate in the race, though he was nowhere near expected to win, with him and his horse only given 20-1 odds. On June 4th, 1923, Frank mounted his horse, named Sweet Kiss, and prepared to travel around the track. The racers were off, and Sweet Kiss quickly trailed behind the group. However, in the final stretch, Sweet Kiss apparently kicked in maximum overdrive and managed to close the gap, with Frank appearing locked in, closely hugging the horse's neck. In an extreme upset, Sweet Kiss actually won the race by a pretty respectable lead. But after dropping from a gallop to a canter to a walk, Frank was still closely gripping the steed. Frank Hayes was dead. During the race, Frank's heart gave out, presumably from the extreme and unhealthily fast weight drop sustained to get into the race in the first place. So yeah, Sweet Kiss carried a corpse across the finish line. Frank Hayes photo finished into the great beyond at the age of 22. Or 35, depending on whatever source you read. I know that's a big discrepancy, but welcome to history. Unfortunately, Sweet Kiss, now superstitiously dubbed Sweet Kiss of Death, never ran another race as jockeys refused to mount the mare, fearing a similar fate. So of course, it was the end of her show, and she got her final curtain call. Alright, I'm starting to think you enjoy getting kidnapped. This time, you're flung into feudal Japan, a rather violent era in Japanese history spanning across several hundreds of years. But this year is 1467, the start of the hostile and chaotic Sengoku period. You've really got your work cut out for you with this one. Time to put your survival skills to use, if you have any. So, do you think you're up for the task? Let's find out. Welcome to Sengoku Jidai, also known as the Warring Clans period, a dangerous time in medieval Japan's already chaotic history. See what I mean? The Sengoku period was actually a subsection of the overarching Muromachi period, but that's not too important. All you need to know is that the government is falling apart. Basically, there's this guy, the Shogun. He's the ruler of Japan because he's a big, strong military man. But wait, I hear you say, I thought Japan had an emperor. And you're right, there is an emperor, and he technically rules Japan, but in reality, he's just a political figurehead that sits in the hotel cuck chair the whole time while the shogun does all the hard work to satisfy the country's freaky desires. So what the heck is causing all the ruckus? Well, the current shogun is in a bit of a pickle. All he wants to do is quit his job and retire so he can write poetry, paint, and strategically plant a few trees. Problem is, he has no son to take the reins, but he does have a war-hating monk brother. Beggars can't be choosers. Problem solved. Uh-oh, looks like the shogun's wife Amazon primed a baby overnight. How embarrassing. Since there was a strict policy of no takesy-backsies, the shogun's brother remains the rightful heir. Wait just one gosh darn fucking second, says Mrs. Shogun. I shot this baby out of my coot chute, so he's gonna be the heir. And thus, a power struggle began. I just want to paint. All of this instability within the shogunate caused the country to be split in two. Team Brother and Team Baby. Powerful clans waged war against each other in an attempt to get their side into power. This political shitshow inevitably led to an uncivil civil war, the Onin War. So the government's in complete shambles and anarchists rejoice. But then they have to realize that they actually have to live in an anarchy. So there's your background. Did you get all that? Glad to hear. Anyway, here you are, just outside of Kyoto, the capital city of Japan at the time, and it's just blazing with culture. And fire. Looks like the warring clans are getting a little carried away at the moment. That being the case, you're forced to roam the countryside in search of a place to anchor your roots and figure out a way back home. But you quickly learn that danger is all around you. It was fairly common for thieves or bandits to cross your path and try to yoink all your valuables, and then stab you. Speaking of the devil, here's one now, so prepare yourself.
Sate sate, betsu no seizon sha.
NANI?!
愚かなことをしないでください。自分だけだと思う。魔女も私を捕まえた。何ヶ月も前。それ以来ずっと生き残っています。そして私は続けます。
よーし。
その葉、もしかして、マンスケボド、つまり、広告の中にいるのです。関係ない。死の準備を。不可能。シスター行く。彼は愛を切り借りた。精密な取り前派。滑らかな仕上がりを実現するフォイルブレード。これはスキンのセーフテクノロジーですが、私さえも。くそ、マンスケボド。
Well, that was a close shave. With the thief inexplicably but conveniently passed out due to being well groomed, you quickly loot him to blend in with the rest of society. Speaking of which, would you believe that feudal Japan did not operate as a hierarchy? Well, you shouldn't, because it did. So let's get out that ladder and descend through the ranks, shall we? At the tippity top was the emperor. He was the guy in charge, but not really. He had a cool shirt and that's about it. Then there's the shogun. He was actually in charge, with the power of commanding the military and controlling national policies and laws. And to be fair, he had a cooler shirt than the emperor. Directly reporting to the shogun were the daimyo, feudal lords and clan leaders that commanded various provinces around the country. They're proud of their land, but they want more. Samurai were loyal warriors with neat swords that honorably served powerful nobles like the daimyo. They were the epitome of courage and honor, and their culture is thriving to this day. Ronin were samurai without their masters, but they could still be bachelors. Ashigaru were samurai interns and general cannon fodder. Basically, they were peasants who were given swords and told to stab other people while still earning a minimum wage. Ah, peasants. The dirt poor majority of the population that did all the work to keep everyone alive. Nowadays, they're referred to as the middle class. Artisans were the ones who made your furniture, your clothes, and your tools. That's cool, but you can't eat a chair, can you? Can you?
And which piece would you like to start with first, sir?
Oh, just the leg. Merchants were scumbag salesmen that just profited off of everyone else's work and were deemed parasites because of it. Buy high, sell low. At the very bottom, to no surprise, were the outcasts. Criminals and beggars for the most part, but also those who had undesirable jobs like butchers, undertakers, actors, entertainers, and reaction channels. Now, you have to understand that this is a very simplified structure of how feudal Japan's class system was laid out. It was a much more complicated web of relationships and rankings that is, quite frankly, above my pay grade as an outcast entertainer. So that begs the question, where would you fit in society? In reality, unless you were Chinese, Japanese, or look at these, you wouldn't have. You'd either be a social outcast or straight up sold into slavery without question. Even if you didn't end up being someone's perpetually untipped servant, you'd still end up being a peasant in some form, whether it's harvesting up rice or hauling in the fish. It was backbreaking work. From dawn until dusk, you did what you had to do to keep yourself and the country fed. After a long, exhausting day, you would get home to your cold, drafty, and very flammable home. Despite being the literal provider of the food for the country, your crops are owned by the shogunate, so you barely even have scraps to eat. Malnourishment was very common amongst the lower class, and while it often resulted in an early grave, you could also inspire a few musicians. If the starvation didn't get you, the diseases certainly would. Smallpox, measles, and chickenpox were known as the 3 great diseases, 3 great opportunities to end up 6 feet under. It's like 2 feet for each disease. But you don't have to deal with any of that. Okay, well, maybe still the disease if you're unlucky, but thanks to your recent battle, you're equipped to pass yourself off as a lowly ashigaru, a foot soldier commanded by a samurai. Since they need as much help as they can get, they won't be asking any questions. If you can hold a sword and swing it at a bad guy, that's good enough. In an event completely convenient to the plot, a samurai wanders up and recruits you to be in his army. In Japanese, of course. Thankfully, you are able to read his subtitles and accept the position. Congrats, you're now a full-fledged member of the Hosokawa clan, one of many clans spread across the country. While the Hosokawa and Yamana clans fought for the control of the capital, other clans fought to expand their own territories. And there were a bunch of them, like the Shiba clan, the Oda clan, and of course, Zelda fanboys. So let's see what your new job entails. You're now a soldier, which means you need to start learning some discipline. You wake up at the ass crack of dawn to start your day. Wake up! Eat a healthy breakfast of rice and veggies, and always practice good hygiene. You spend the morning strengthening your military skills and are partnered up with Hoshi. He's a nice guy. He was a farmer, but decided that maiming and pillaging could prove more lucrative. Together, you train martial arts, archery, and swordplay all throughout the morning as a way to keep both your body and mind sharp as a tack. Whew, all that training made the time fly by. It's already noon. So after a quick lunch of rice and veggies, time to fortify the walls of the camp to make sure no bad guys get in. Build it huge. Looks like your samurai has a task for you. You've been assigned to gather intelligence from the enemy. We are in the middle of the Onin War after all, and that gosh dang Yamana clan is burning Kyoto down faster than we are. Can't let that happen. No problem, Master Sam, you say in Japanese subtitles. You wait until nightfall to carry out the mission. After a hearty dinner of rice and veggies, you infiltrate the enemy camp without causing too much suspicion. You quickly swipe the intelligence and giddily make haste back to base. With the intelligence in hand, your samurai congratulates you on a job well done. In Japanese, of course. You slowly open the letter and scan the text. Oh no. It can't be. This is...
Hi, we've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty.
Shit. You stole the clan leader's mail by accident. Wait, there's a note. You're not the best at reading Japanese text, but you think you can make out what the message means. Looks like your next mission starts at dawn. Oh yeah, it's wartime. You better get dressed, champ. You've got a country to die for. Unlucky for you, early Ashigaru were not well equipped for battle. Remember that they were dirt poor farmers. They couldn't afford ornate weapons, so they had to make do with what they had, which was farming equipment. Ever just want to shove a shovel into someone's throat just to see what would happen? And now you can. It kills them. One weapon of choice was the kama, a simple sickle-like weapon suited for slicing and stabbing some sneaky suckers. If you get the DLC, you can slap a chain on that bad boy, granting you a lethal radius of several feet and allowing you to open that pit up. Ashigaru that were well-trained or well-funded had access to better weapons and armor. Perhaps the most effective weapon that they could wield was the yari, a long spear that could be outfitted with all kinds of blades. Want to stab? Go for the omi yari. Want to slash? Try the katakama yari. If you want to support the boys from afar, get yourself a yumi, an asymmetrical longbow which was deadly on the battlefield with an effective range of over 400 feet. Archers were a core support group in any army. They would riddle the battlefield using a reliable method of spray and pray. It's just a shame that friendly fire was always on. If you wanted to spice things up, you could opt for fire or even explosive arrows. As for armor, it varied. The best ashigaru were absolutely strapped with thick leather chest pieces, helmets, sleeves, and greaves. They were usually fitted with metal plates for added protection. Low-ranking ashigaru were fitted with a cheaper, easier to produce armor called jack shit. Whatever clothing they had was their best bet. But it should be noted that the spoils of war were generous. Ashigaru were allowed to pillage and loot whoever they attacked. Slay an enemy with better weapons and armor? Looks like you found an upgrade. Now that you're all equipped, it's time to storm the battlefield with your best friend Samurai. What a cool guy. No. They got Sam. That's it. You charge into battle to avenge your fallen mentor. You spot an enemy, but it's a familiar face. Hoshi? You switched sides? Yeah, much better loot, says Hoshi, in Japanese of course. Just then, you notice fire spreading to a nearby building. Well, that's gonna suck, eh? Ugh, you again? Kyoku-naku, hito no ke wa sore naide kudasai. Hey guys, today's topic is all about humanity's greatest achievement. Cheese. And unless you're lactose intolerant through genetic inferiority, there's really nothing like a good slice of cheese to brighten up your day. It comes in all kinds of flavors and textures too, like smooth, salty, and absolute garbage. But have you ever asked yourself, what is cheese? As appetizing as it sounds, cheese is just curdled milk. But which milk? Any milk really, assuming that you have a healthy and legal supply. And once you have your fresh, delicious, hair-free milk, just let it outright spoil. No way, you say, but yes way. Curds and whey. Curds are the gross little floating pieces at the top, and whey is the milk sweat that's left behind. Add in some flavors to your curds and voila, you have cheese. Of course, someone will say that the process is a little bit more complicated than that, and they'd be right, but this is a history video, so that begs the question, where did cheese even come from? Cheese is one of those inventions that was made by accident, like potato chips, Post-its, and you. According to official historic cheese lore, a merchant in ancient Europe or Asia or somewhere in this area stored milk for his travels in the best container he had at the time, a sheep's stomach. After a day of traveling in a hot desert, something magical happened. "Good golly, am I thirsty," says the merchant, wiping sweat off of his brow. "I can't wait to tear into this hot, delicious, refreshing milk." The merchant found that in addition to drinking his milk, which was now suspiciously salty, there were also some chunks to chew on as a snack, ruining the need for his provisions of Oreos. It turns out that the sheep's stomach contained rennet, an enzyme that delicately convinced the milk to change from a liquid to a solid. Word of this marvelous chewy milk spread far and wide, making cheese more popular than Jesus, who wouldn't exist for thousands of years. Earliest known evidence of cheese making dates back over 8,000 years in what is now Switzerland. I know, the Swiss making cheese, big shocker, right? But more evidence has been found all across the world, from the country of Africa to the continent of Italy. Since food preservation techniques back then were nothing more than just salting and drying, cheeses were often salty and dry. It would be a long while before cheeses that we know would start popping up. Cheddar was invented around the 1100s, Parmesan in 1597, and Gouda a century later. In today's world, there are over 2,000 types of cheese, ranging from white American cheese to edible. Some countries even formed cheese boards, which provides a sort of patent on their cheeses, basically saying, hey, this is my cheese. Go make your own. Just like how champagne can't really be called champagne unless it's from the Champagne region in France, Parmesan or Parmigiano Reggiano can't be called as such unless it's from that particular region in Italy. Lucky for me, I can just pick it up at my local grocery store. Checkmate, Italy. All cheese types can be categorized into a basic system, organizing them based on their moisture content, like some kind of moist meter. First up, you have your fresh cheeses. These are your sloppiest mega wet cheeses like ricotta and mozzarella. Really good for making a nice calzone or some fresh Italian boba tea. Next up are the soft cheeses like brie and camembert. These cheeses are generally smooth and creamy and are good as spreads on like bread and stuff. Third are the semi-soft cheeses like provolone and Munster, which aren't as soft as the soft cheeses, otherwise they would be classified as soft cheeses. These are good for some good ass sandwich making. Fourth, we have the semi-firm cheese, or as I like to call them, Here you can find cheddar, Gouda, or Gruyere. Great for charcuterie parties and Lunchables for the kiddos. Finally, we have the fully erect hard cheeses like Parmesan and Asiago. Perfect for harassing your local Italian restaurant waitress, this grade is great for grating, and are typically your most flavorful cheeses as well as the most pungent. Just like gamers, the smellier it is, the better it is. It should be said that there is also a category of blue cheeses, for distinguished people who love the complex, bold, and sour flavors of actual mold. No matter the type of cheese you choose, culinary nerds will always tell you that you're not pairing it with the right complementary food or drink in order to earn your first class ticket to Flavortown. Look, if I want to shove a handful of shredded mozzarella down my throat at 2 in the morning, then let me. Don't recommend to me that I wash it down with a 2012 Sauvignon Blanc, because I did that, but it was a beer. Nowadays, cheese is still enjoyed as a staple of modern cuisine all across the world, but mainly in France where it is typically served sliced with fruit or bread after a main course. In the cultural hub that is the United States, we serve it as an appetizer, sliced in a sort of stick shape where it is then breaded and fried, providing key nutrients for us to grow big and strong. Remember that no matter how you slice it, cheese is a delicious addition to any meal, so feel free to eat it to your heart's content, until it fails from all of the excess sodium. There's nothing more embarrassing than talking at a family dinner about your favorite historical subjects, only to be corrected by your sibling going, actually, Napoleon was above average height for his time. You contemplate what to do with the rest of your night since you just got absolutely destroyed. You quickly fact-check this verbal beatdown, but realize, oh my god, they were right. How could I have been so wrong? If you don't want this to be you, then listen up, because here's some historical facts that you're probably wrong about. Number 1, the majority of American colonists wanted independence from Great Britain. Since we know that history is written by the winners, it is often thought that the overwhelming majority of American colonists hated the filthy stinking redcoats, an attitude that served as the catalyst for the American Revolution. But that's not entirely true. Sure, there were revolutionaries, but in fact, the colonists who wanted revolution were never even in the majority. Less than 45% of American colonists wanted independence, while the other 55% were either rich loyalists who didn't really want to risk losing their comfy fish and chips way of life, or neutral fence sitters who were just along for the ride, throwing caution to the wind and living their simple peasant lives. Once the revolution did start, however, many loyalists either fled to Canada, cowards, or fought against their own people, only to lose horribly. Number 2, the Declaration of Independence was signed on the 4th of July, 1776. American Independence Day on the 4th of July is a time for Americans to let loose by relaxing by the pool, detonating explosives, and having 1 or 10 beers with friends, family, and whatever remaining fingers they have. Surely a day called Independence Day means that the Declaration of Independence was signed on that day, right? Not exactly. Independence from Britain was actually declared on July 2nd, but the head honchos at the time were like, oh, maybe we should write this down and make it official or something. So after 2 days of figuring out Microsoft Word, they came back with an actual declaration, which was officially adopted on the 4th of July. But since everyone was way too busy celebrating in their pools with some brewskis, it wasn't fully signed until August 2nd, 1776. Number 3, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. Yeah, a lot of these were a little bit more United States themed than I thought, so I'm either biased or the rest of world history is pretty boring. Probably both. One of the first things American youngins are taught in school is how to lock a door and avoid gunfire. And also that George Washington was the first president. But guess what? Not true. Okay, technically he was the first president elected by the people, but there were several other rich white dudes who held the title of president before him. The first being John Hanson, with the title of President of the United States in Congress assembled. Although he only served for just 1 year, he did help structure the growing baby government we all know and know today. Number 4, Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. Yeah, no, the concept of electricity was known, though not well understood, for thousands of years back when Egyptians were getting shocked by electric eels and not learning their lessons. The Greeks discovered the concept of static electricity as well by rubbing fur on amber and attracting a few light objects. Benjamin Franklin was chilling on his porch watching a storm when he pondered, that's probably that electricity stuff everyone keeps talking about. So, he got his handy-dandy, trusty, dusty kite to test his theory. He strapped a small metal key to the string to act as a conductor for the electricity. After the key gave him a small jolt, he was like, nice. So while he didn't discover electricity as a whole, he did prove that lightning was electrical. That's kinda cool too. Not being on the $100 bill cool, but cool. Number 5. People in New York threw themselves out of buildings during the 1929 stock market crash. Good times don't last forever, and the United States learned this very quickly when in 1929 the stock market saw the worst crash in history, dropping over 50% in value thanks to irresponsible consumer and bank behavior like predatory loans and purchasing on credit. Who does that? Billions of dollars were wiped out practically overnight. Now, when your wealth and living standard gets Thanos snapped out of existence, you might think that a quick leap and a hard drill into the pavement would solve your problem since you can't be poor if you're dead. Well, maybe some people did think that, but apparently no one's intrusive thoughts won because there was no reported uptick in self-unaliving in the wake of the stock market crash. It would actually be another 72 years before jumping from buildings became a short-lived fad in New York. Number 6. Germany invaded Russia in the winter during World War II. Finally made it out of the United States. Yeah, there's a common misconception that Germans decided to pull a pro-gamer move and invade their barren, tundra, wasteland ally Russia in the dead of winter, prompting the Germans to be like, "Fuck!" and turn back home. Not the case. Germans pushed into Russian territory on June 22nd, 1941, and actually made considerable progress on their way to Moscow, since Russia was not expecting such a top 10 anime betrayal. But tough territory challenges, low morale, and overall exhaustion caused German progress to slow down while new, fresh Russian troops were being spawned in. Once winter set in, things only got worse. Since Russia was hosting, Germans were susceptible to extreme lag and their ping was trash. Germans eventually were driven out of Russia after failing to defeat the Red Army. Number 7. Life expectancy in the Middle Ages was only in the 30s. This is a mathematical misconception here. You love math, right? Right. So the way an average lifespan is calculated is you take the ages across all people and divide by the number of people to get your average. Thing is, babies weren't really resilient. So when you start chucking a bunch of zeros and ones into the data pool, you get a strongly skewed average. In reality, it was common for people in the Middle Ages to live into their 50s and 60s.
I'm 37. What? I'm 37, I'm not old.
Leaving plenty of time for them to do fun things like farming and... So, if you made it to 25 in the Middle Ages, you were expected to live another 25 years on average. Sure, it's shorter than today's expected lifespan of 73 years, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Number 8. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Although he is credited with inventions like the phonograph and absolutely terrifying talking nightmare dolls, you probably know Thomas Edison is most famous for inventing the light bulb. Well, that's a lie. Before Edison's design in 1879, electric lighting was used as far back as 1802 with the electric arc lamp. Operating under the same general principle as a light bulb today, the arc lamp generated an electric arc that would light up whatever room it was in. Problem was, these things were loud, expensive, inefficient, and funny enough, way too bright. The design went through multiple improvements in the following decades, making them much more practical for uses like street lamps or lighting large buildings. To his credit, Edison did improve the design further to allow light bulbs to last longer and be more practical in a household setting, but his light bulbs were not the first. Number 9. Cars were invented in the United States by Henry Ford. Well, look at Americans trying to take credit for things yet again. While Henry Ford never invented the automobile, he did revolutionize the mass production of them with the invention of the assembly line. Oh wait, he didn't invent that either. Ransom Olds of the Oldsmobile brand did. But Henry did take that model and improve upon it by making it a moving assembly line, dropping the assembly time of a single car from 12 hours to just 1.5. Oh yeah, and the first gas-powered automobile was invented by Carl Benz, one half of the famous Mercedes-Benz brand, back in 1886, 17 years before Ford's first car was produced. Also, it looks stupid. Number 10. You should subscribe to the channel. Oh wait, this one's true. How'd that get in there? Number 10-2. The Greeks tricked the Trojans with a giant wooden horse. Well, this one's a classic. We've all heard the story of the Trojan horse, proved that people used to pull off good pranks before cameras and ad revenue. The story goes that during the Trojan War in 1183 BC, sneaky Greekies wanted to gain the upper hand in sieging the city of Troy. In order to do so, they built a large wooden horse and left it at the city gate. The Trojans were like, huh, neat, a present, don't mind if I do, ha ha ha, and wheeled it inside of the city. In the middle of the night, when the Trojans were honk-shoeing, Greek soldiers snuck out of the hollow wooden horse and slaughtered the Trojans, leading to the fall of Troy. Yeah, never happened. In fact, it's debated if the Trojan War itself even happened. The story about the Trojan War was written by the Greek poet Homer, who, funny enough, might not have even existed himself. Historians really need to get their act together because it's getting kinda hard to fact check all of this. Well, there you go. Be sure to bring up whatever you learned today to your next family or friend gathering so they could be like, that's neat. Leading to a dead-end conversation where you just go back to scrolling through your phone. The year is 1939. It has been over 2.5 years since the end of World War I in 1918, a war that left European countries in shambles, but none more so than the country of Germany. At the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles essentially took Germany into a back alley and broke its political and economical legs, beating it within an inch of its life with no way to recover. With an economy and government in the toilet, much like today, Germans were angry, and they needed someone to be angry at. It certainly didn't help that with a name like World War I, there was an inevitability that at least one sequel would happen, and that is what the world is about to experience. Local starving artist and ball of anger Adolf Hitler, who was slightly more angry than his fellow neighbors, quickly rose to political power. He was the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as Nazis. The Nazis were able to garner mass public support thanks to their ability to uphold the political tradition of blaming someone else for your problems. And like any modern Gen Z teen, the Nazis quickly blamed capitalism and big businesses. However, they quickly realized that capitalists had something that they needed. So instead, they fell back to their next best plan: complete racial eradication. Hitler believed that bad apples spoil the bunch, so he would just get rid of the bad apples. Except these apples weren't apples, but people. Jews, Slavs, Poles, cripples, bloodles, furries, gays, and worst of all, Jehovah's Witnesses. With them gone, Germany can be a pure society and get back to being a world superpower with all the bratwurst and beer that they could ever want. Many German people thought that this was an absolutely wonderful idea, and so Hitler was made Chancellor to Germany in 1933, where just a year later, he promoted himself to Supreme Leader with total and absolute power, and no one thought that this was a red flag at all. But there was still a problem: the Treaty of Versailles. Well, it turns out that Hitler could easily bypass the harsh terms of the treaty by flat out ignoring them. So he did. In a few short years, he secretly beefed up Germany with shiny new soldiers and tanks, but he quickly realized that he needed something stronger than guns or bombs. He needed friends. It didn't take long for Hitler's influence to go viral, reaching far beyond the freshly shrunken borders of Germany. His push for regaining power and territorial expansion convinced both Italy and Japan to do the exact same thing. Italy wanted land back that it had lost in World War I. Japan wanted to conquer more Asian territory without the disapproving gaze of Uncle Britain and Aunt America just across the way. Staying true to his word, Hitler began invading countries and taking them for himself. First on his list were Austria and Czechoslovakia, but why? Surprisingly, no other country seemed to really care much at all, probably because they were too busy trying to figure out what a Czechoslovakia even was. As a precaution to future aggression, Germany sent a friend request to the Soviet Union Ultimate Master Leader man, Joseph Stalin, who not only had a bigger country, but a bigger mustache. They signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which made Germany seem more intimidating on the world map having such a big friend on his side, even though his new friend was full of nothingness and snow. Hitler knew he could continue taking territories for himself with little opposition, so he continued to take land, but with much opposition. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded the Polish front, with the Soviet Union double-teaming the Polish behind shortly after. Now suddenly people care, and World War I-II has officially begun. Stalin and the Soviets did a lot of the initial heavy lifting, invading a lot of the EA countries, while Germany fought the easier to pronounce ones. Hitler then pushed into France, taking many pictures with the Eiffel Tower before being rushed away by other tourists wishing to do the same. Germany now only had one more power to face: Great Britain. But there was a problem. In the confusion and chaos, Britain had dug a moat around itself, making a land invasion impossible. But Germany had another trick up its sleeve: skyboats. Germany began bombarding Britain from September 1940 all the way until May 1941, destroying countless fish and chip shops in the process. Britain eventually retaliated with its own fleet of skyboats and defeated Germany during the Battle of Britain. Britain was also being supplied by a long-distance relationship across the Atlantic Ocean, the United States of America. Germany continued its conquest of Eastern Europe, mowing down Greece and Yugoslavia in early 1941, furthering Hitler's goal of having enough landmass to create the perfect race, while simultaneously murdering everyone along the way. But Hitler soon realized that the world was not procedurally generated, so he would soon run out of land to take. Hitler began to gaze longingly at Stalin's large and throbbing landmass, wondering if he could just have a little bit for himself, to which Stalin promptly said, "No." So broken was Hitler's heart that he devised a sinister plot to get what he wanted. Enter Operation Barbarossa. In one of the greatest anime betrayals of all time, Germany invaded the Soviet Union like a bunch of idiots. But surprisingly, Germany was moderately successful, reaching as close as 200 miles from the Russian capital of Moscow. If you've ever run 200 miles, you'd realize that that's not very close at all, and you'd also be very tired, much like the German soldiers. Despite being covered in snow and ice, Germans were surprised to discover that the Soviet Union was rather cold, particularly in the winter when things get cold. Thanks to their natural +50 frost resistance, the Soviets were able to push the Germans back, but now Germany found itself fighting two enemies at once, the British and the Soviets. But a new threat was waiting across the big water to the west, or east if you go far enough. While Europe was getting absolutely reamed, Japan had its own agenda, mainly trying to conquer China and the specific territories, specifically the Pacific. This was a huge no-no in the eyes of the United States, who wanted to first confirm if there was any oil worth taking. The US sent a letter to Japan stating that they will no longer trade with them. Japan, in return, decided to prank the United States by sending 360 planes to obliterate Pearl Harbor, a Hawaiian naval base. Unfortunately for Japan, the United States did not see the hidden camera just off to the side and immediately declared war. Germany then declared war on the United States, to which the United States had no choice but to declare double war on Germany. All hell was about to break loose. The Allied powers were completely speedrunning through the Pacific theater, island hopping all around between 1941 and 1943, hitting one gold split after another. They were going to take the World War II 80% record, and Japan was starting to sweat. Meanwhile, British and American forces had liberated the colonized northern Africa, pushing into Italy and giving Mussolini the boot in July of 1943. But Germans were not so quick to give up at the spaghetti, so battles in Italy continued until 1945. The fighting pushed into Europe, with British, American, and even maple syrup soldiers storming the beaches of France on June 6, 1944, a day that will come to be known as D-Day, because of how nervous all of the soldiers were. With the Allied forces and the Soviets closing in on both sides, Hitler swiftly retired to his personal bunker to dine on a bullet with a glass of cyanide. With its supreme leader taking a supremely permanent nap, Germany had no choice but to surrender on May 8, 1945. Even as the sole remaining combatant, Japan continued to aggressively fight in the Pacific theater. United States President Harry Truman wished someone would just drop a huge bomb on Japan, so he did. Twice. And that was enough to end the war entirely. After the war, Germany was split and divided amongst the winners to prevent a World War II too. Any remaining Nazis were tried and executed, with some oddly having descendants in South America today. The United States briefly occupied Japan, sprinkling a hint of capitalism while dismantling their non-defensive military structure. Despite this, Japan prospered, but never forgot what America had done. In the coming years, Japan would unleash a secret weapon to exact their revenge and poison the rest of the world from within. If you're going to be executed, you'd probably want the process to be relatively quick and painless, be it one fell swoop from the guillotine, a short drop and a sudden stop, or just getting injected with night-night juice. But sometimes, things don't go according to plan. So let's see how it all went wrong for a few poor unfortunate souls. If you're getting your melon chopped off, you're going to want two things, a sharp blade and a trained executioner. Poor Margaret Pole got maybe one of those. Once the very wealthy Countess of Salisbury, not the steak, Margaret fell from the good graces of King Henry VIII when she went all girl boss on him for divorcing his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Henry brushed this off, but was set over the edge when Margaret's very influential Catholic cardinal son Reginald Pole also scolded him, but from a safe distance over in Italy.
Hey Henry, you suck!
The proud Protestant king responded, being all right, bet, and imprisoned Margaret, Reginald, and the rest of her family in the Tower of London.
That'll teach you.
Margaret was held for 2.5 years in the Tower in actually pretty fair conditions, with her own personal servants and lavish clothing, until one morning when she got a surprise visitor. Hey Margaret, how's it going? You look great, by the way. I love that dress. So listen, yeah, you're gonna be executed today. Okay, bye. That morning on May 27th, 1541, Margaret was led to a courtyard to have her dome knocked off. Unfortunately for her, the main executioner had been sent away to fight some rebels, so his intern filled in. Generally, executions are supposed to be swift and smooth. Not this one. The inexperienced executioner couldn't chop worth shit, so he ended up just hacking Margaret's back and neck to bits. Oops. 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 It took 11 swings to finally detach head from body. Now, if you're going to be executed, you might as well have done something pretty cool to deserve it. Take Robert François Damier, for example. As a very French man, he hated his very French king, King Louis XV, because reasons. Well, in 1757, he decided to channel that hatred into something productive, like developing an elaborate plan to kill the king. As the merry monarch was entering his carriage at the Palace of Versailles, Damier mashed the A button to rush past the bodyguards and stab the king with a penknife. Fortunately for King Louis, his thick-ass royal king coat was thick enough to stop the pen from doing any severe damage, and the pen only penetrated less than ½ of an inch into his chest, causing nothing but a flesh wound. Damier was immediately arrested, convicted, and sentenced to be drawn and quartered by horses. Now, if you're unfamiliar with such an execution method, it's exactly as it sounds. No, not that. There we go. A rope is tied around each limb and strapped to a horse. 4 limbs, 4 horses. They then pull in opposite directions until your limbs pop out of their sockets one by one. Real fun stuff. Well, that's how it's supposed to go. Reportedly, Damier had stubborn anatomy that just refused to separate at all. So, to make things a little bit easier, his arms and legs had their tendons cut to make the ripping easier. After his last limb detached, he was reported to have still been alive, so his stumpy, bloody torso was burned to finish the job. Bit overkill for a little scratch with a penknife, but whatever. Thomas Ketchum, who has no relation to the world-famous Pokemon trainer, was an infamous American outlaw who would give Arthur Morgan a run for his money.
Quack, quack.
Ketchum, also known as Black Jack, had his own posse of cowboys for some rootin' tootin', robbin' and shootin'. Ketchum and his gang terrorized the Wild West in the late 1800s with a string of shootouts, robberies, murders, but they had bigger ambitions with heftier payouts. That's when Tom decided to go for gold. Literal gold. On trains. He was gonna rob trains. With his brother Sam at his side, the two robbed trains to the tune of a modern-day equivalent of a few $1 million over the years. But eventually, their luck ran out. On a solo run, Sam was injured in a shootout, arrested, and died of an infection of his wounds a few days later. Tom, unaware that his brother just bit the dust robbing a train, made an attempt on the very same train just a month later. At this point, the train conductor's a little sick of getting robbed, so he pulled an Uno reverse card on Tom, using a shotgun to blast away his elbow. The train chugged away and Tom was left injured on the wayside, where he was later arrested by law enforcement. For his countless crimes over the years, Tom was sentenced to death by hanging. Unfortunately for Tom, though, the small New Mexico town had no experience actually hanging a man, so they did the best they could. Gallows? Check. Prisoner? Check. Length of hanging rope? I don't know. The gallows were tested with a 200-pound sack of flour, which seemed to have been successful. But the problem here is that the same rope that was tested was reused for the execution, so that 200-pound sack made the rope really tight. Since Tom was notorious at this point, crowds flocked to witness his execution. On April 26, 1901, the rope was placed around Tom's neck and the trapdoor was sprung. The townsfolk ended up getting way more than they bargained for. The long, tight rope instantly decapitated Tom once he reached the apex of his final descent. He should have quit, but now he's just ahead. But at least he made a cool postcard. Hey, quick side note here. So I'm realizing that there's like no image resources for this section, so I hope you don't mind some crude artwork. King Cow GL was the second woman in Thai history to be put to death by gunfire. Being a nanny to the 6-year-old son of a wealthy business family, she was promptly fired because... But that didn't sit too well with her. In a desperate attempt to get some money, she, along with several accomplices, had kidnapped the 6-year-old for ransom. They had demanded 200,000 Thai baht, or $6,000, for the release of the boy. After the terrified family failed to follow the exact directions of where to bring the ransom money, the young boy was brutally beaten and buried alive. GL had attempted to save the boy with whom she had grown fond of, but failed to do so. GL and her accomplices were quickly arrested and sentenced to death by firing squad. Now, Thailand did firing squads a bit different from what you'd expect. Instead of lining a blindfolded prisoner to a wall with several gunmen taking aim, the prisoner is instead tied facing backward on a wooden cross. A concealing screen is put up with a target pointing in the vicinity of the prisoner's heart, and a rifle is lined up to the target. A single executioner is instructed to fire up to 15 shots at the target, guaranteeing the prisoner's death. On January 13th, 1979, GL was executed and carted off to the morgue, and all seemed to have been successful. But that thought quickly evaporated once GL was found screaming her frickin' head off in the morgue and attempting to stand up. But why wasn't the execution successful, you might ask? Well, I'll tell you if you just wait a minute. Jeez. It turns out that GL's genetics played a prank on her. She was diagnosed with situs inversus, meaning that all of her organs were mirrored to how they normally should be, with her heart on her right side of her chest rather than her left. So those initial shots all missed her heart entirely, and instead of killing her, just ended up hurting a lot. She was instantly pulled from the morgue, set up once more on the cross, and given another volley of justice seeds to the back. When it comes to new inventions, they usually go through rigorous testing and tweaks to perfect their function before being put on the market for commercial use. Well, since the electric chair wasn't a commercial product, who cares? Improvements can be made later on once enough testing is performed. William Kemmler was such a test subject. A poor businessman and a drunk, Kemmler often found himself in trouble. According to an article in the New York Times, on March 29, 1889, Kemmler was recovering from a drinking binge the night before when he became enraged with his wife, Tilly Ziegler. He accused her of stealing from him and preparing to run away with a friend of his. When the argument had reached a peak, Kemmler calmly went to the barn out back, grabbed a hatchet, and returned to the house. He struck Tilly repeatedly, killing her. He then went to a neighbor's house and announced that he had just murdered his wife. Kemmler was arrested, swiftly convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to be executed by a brand new invention. On August 6, 1890, Kemmler was brought to the chair. He reportedly did not resist in any way and willingly accepted his punishment. After being secured and wishing everyone farewell, the switch was thrown. 1,000 volts were put through Kemmler's body for 17 agonizing seconds. Kemmler was unconscious, but alive. The voltage was doubled and power was thrown again. This is where things became spectacular. It was reported by witnesses that Kemmler's blood vessels ruptured and bled under his skin and his entire body caught fire. The entire execution room filled with the foul odor of burning flesh, causing many witnesses to panic and flee. The execution lasted 8 terrifying minutes. An autopsy showed that Kemmler's skull had burnt to a crisp and his brain cooked to a tender medium rare.
It looks stunning.
The New York Times later published a review stating that the executioner would have done better with an axe. Terrifying mythical creatures from around the world. Again. If you're from my neck of the woods or are fans of a certain hockey team, you might be familiar with the Jersey Devil. Let me set the mood. It's a dark, stormy, cliche spooky night where we find this withering old broad. This is Mother Leeds, a presumed witch on the verge of slopping out her 13th crotch goblin. Problem is, she didn't actually want this child because, while 12 children is doable, 13 is just absurd. So during this pregnancy, she had wished that the devil himself would take this child from her, and that's apparently enough to make a binding contract. The baby was born and looked as cute as a button, but as it aged, it began to evolve into a twisted monstrosity, transforming into the Jersey Devil. It is described as having a horse-like body, a goat head, a forked tail, and large menacing wings that allow it to soar through the pine trees of southern New Jersey in the United States. But is he real? Well, back in 1909, there was a moment of panic as several reports across the states of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey stated sightings of the winged beast. Some claims involved the killing of livestock, an attack on a trolley car, and even an attack on a social club. The reported attacks caused mayhem on local businesses and schools closed out of fear. The Philadelphia Zoo even put up a $10,000 reward for the capture of the creature, which still remains unclaimed to this day. So if you ever find yourself unlucky enough to actually be in New Jersey itself and are traveling down the empty county roads in the dense pine barrens, keep an eye to the night sky as he hunts for prey. If you don't catch a glimpse, your hairs may stand on end when you hear his blood-curdling screeches, but also his fresh rhymes.
My name's the Jersey Devil, and I'm here to say that I'm posted.
Ever have the insatiable craving for the flesh of a fellow human? Well, you might just be a Wendigo, or you need to seek some professional help. Or both. Just a little ways up into the Great White North of Canada is where we find the origins of the Wendigo legend. Stemming from the folklore of the indigenous Algonquin Native American tribe, the Wendigo is said to either be an evil spirit or a creature in its own right. It is described as a thin, emaciated corpse with long, sharp claws on its little fingies. Its skin is sallow and gray, giving it a sallow and gray appearance. It also sports a stylish deer skull and antlers, which is a great distraction from the fact that you have 0.67 seconds left to live now that you've seen one. The Wendigo mercilessly hunts down any prey that gets lost in the woods on dark, cold, wintry nights. It is never satisfied when it feasts and must relentlessly seek out more prey. Every time it does feed, it grows larger in proportion, but always looks like it skipped every gym day possible. A Wendigo can grow as large as 15 feet, which, at that point you might as well just give up as they have exceptional hearing and eyesight, so there's no point in hiding. Oh yeah, I said they, because there can be multiple. But if you are feeling like these Wendies need to go, you can test your luck in ripping one's heart out and setting it on fire to banish it to the Shadow Realm forever. Just remember that there are others waiting nearby. Let's take a skip across the pond to Ireland, the home of rain, redheads, beer, and the Dullahan. Never heard of the Dullahan? Well, I'm gonna tell you about the Dullahan. He is known as the Harbinger of Death, a foreboding figure that leaves nothing but destruction in his wake. The Dullahan is described as a headless horseman with clothes and a horse blacker than black, giving him the appearance of a character you have yet to unlock. He carries his head in one hand and a human spine whip in another, which he uses to whip out the eyes of anyone who dares to look upon him. Oh look, the Dullahan. Hey. The Dullahan is also a bit of a party pooper, showing up on holidays and festivals to fill his quota of bodies and to step on your cake.
Oh, my cake.
So if you want to avoid this guy, there's two possibilities. One is that you're his target and there's absolutely nothing you can do, so... But if you're not his intended victim, be sure you're carrying at least a single gold coin in your pocket or wearing gold jewelry, as the Dullahan hates gold for some reason. You ever see a Dullahan chasing down a blinged out rapper? Didn't think so. Right across the Irish Sea is Scotland. It's like Ireland, but more Scottish, and they've got some pretty interesting creatures in their repertoire. But today, we will be looking at the Ach-Ishka. Yeah, doesn't sound how it looks, does it? The Ach-Ishka is a malevolent water spirit that takes on the form of a horse because Ach-Ishka literally means water horse in Scottish Gaelic. So what does it look like? Pretty much a wet horse. Some interpretations have it with fins or claws, but a wet horse just seems funnier to me. What isn't funny is why it is so evil. The malevolent mare is said to roam the nearby sea, but can trot around on land where you may even be able to mount and ride the demonic horse if you've got the stones for it. The problem is, once you've climbed aboard, you become permanently stuck to its back if it smells or even sees water, and You know, being a water spirit, that's pretty much a given. Once you've locked onto the saturated steed, it makes a beeline for the sea. It can breathe underwater, you can't. So you can see why you'd be in a bit of a pickle. The Ak-Ishka will drag you down to the darkest depths where you will be ripped from its back and consumed, with only your stinky liver remaining to float to the surface as proof of your demise. Maybe you shouldn't ride on the back of a demonic horse? I don't know. But if you feel like you don't stand a chance, I suppose you could load up a blunderbuss full of silver to convert the horse demon into a pasta sauce. But first make sure it's not just a normal horse you're aiming at. The Black Plague wasn't fun for anyone. Millions died to an invisible force that ravaged Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa. So, what's the best way to make sense of such an unknown cause of death? Why, make up a horrifying mythical nightmare creature, of course. In Norway, you may hear tales of the Pesta, a decrepit old witch that was the personification of the Black Plague itself. She is described as a dusty old hag dressed in black with the typical dead, sunken eyes. You've seen this stuff before, I mean, how scary could it really be? Grandma Plague is always traveling, either on foot, by boat, or even flying, with no true destination but only with the intention of spreading desolation and despair. She can show up to your house at any moment. Grabbing some breakfast? Pesta. Doing laundry? Pesta. Petting your cat? Check again, because you're petting the Pesta, and she loves it. This crusty old bitch comes equipped with either a broom or a rake, which according to legend determines the magnitude of death that she will leave behind. So remember this, if you see a rake, a few are left in her wake. If you see a broom, you're all fucked. Unfortunately, since she is the representation of the plague, there is no way to truly defeat her. Your best bet is to maintain your distance from others and practice good hygiene. Either that, or you can give her a quick spray of bleach. If you've ever glanced at a mirror and taken a look at the gorgeous creature standing before you, then you know what a doppelganger looks like. Or at least you know what your doppelganger looks like, because that's what a doppelganger is. An identical, non-biologically related copy of you. So, sorry twins, you gotta sit this one out. You guys are creepy enough as it is. Originating from German folklore, it's unknown what this creature's true form is, as it instantly mimics the first person it lays eyes on. These mischievous little scamps will try to ruin your reputation by committing evil deeds and tricks while assuming your identity. So, it could be a valid excuse to relieve you of responsibilities for your actions. Farted in class? Nah, wasn't me. Terrible credit score? Wrong guy. Mass arson? My hands are clean. Even if you're innocent and all that, what's concerning is that the doppelganger can actually start to influence your own decisions by planting evil thoughts in your head by means of telepathy. So if you're sweating bullets as you're tempted to swipe the officer's service weapon when he stops you for a minor traffic infraction, that's just a doppelganger talking. But you have to resist. Just don't resist the officer or you'll end up looking down a barrel.
Hey, you're finally awake.
But if you do have to prove your innocence when side by side with your copy, there's a couple features that can tell you two apart. For one, the doppelganger has no shadow, so that's an easy giveaway. It also lacks a reflection, so it could just be a vampire that looks like you, or it's the doppelganger. Either way, that thing isn't you. You're you. Aren't you?
Evil kings doing evil things.
Hey, he wasn't a king. Yeah, you're right. While some of the guys on this list weren't kings by title, they held very high positions of power nonetheless. So, to you I say, moving on. Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or just Nero to his friends and enemies, was the very last Roman emperor of the less than impressive Julio-Claudian dynasty, which lasted from 27 BC to 68 AD. Like any complete psycho, Nero had a pretty complicated childhood. When Nero was just a wee Nerite at the age of 3, his daddy went and abandoned the family by dying. Mom got exiled to a tiny island for maybe attempting to kill Emperor Caligula. Caligula got killed anyway. Mom is unexiled and marries the new emperor, Claudius, which happens to be her uncle, by the way. The public is all, ugh. And now little Nero has a great uncle emperor dad who has proclaimed him to be the new heir to the throne. I love you, Uncle Daddy. That's a lot to deal with as a child, but the sweet birthday presents help you quickly forget. So why did this happen? Because Nero's mom, Agrippina, was a political savage. Her only interest was power. So much so that, to prevent a revenge plot, she had the recently stabbed Emperor Caligula's widow accused of black magic, banished, and even convinced her to fully deplete her own health bar. Now, she wants her baby boy Nero to be emperor, and in 54 AD, that's what happened. Emperor Claudius died under mysterious circumstances. Mysterious in the sense of having a potentially poisonous mushroom just absolutely slam down his gullet by Agrippina herself. Maybe. But since the board game Clue had yet to be invented, forensic puzzle solving was pretty minimal. Oh my god! Put that knife down, someone's just been murdered! Coincidentally, Nero's stepbrother, Britannicus, who had claim to the throne, also decided to expire around the same time under mysterious circumstances. So now, at just 16 years old, Nero is emperor.
Yes! Yes!
So how did he do being emperor? He actually started off pretty well. He banned capital punishment, expanded the arts, gave disaster relief aid to neighboring cities, reduced taxes, and even gave some rights to slaves. Seems like a pretty nice guy, actually. Uh-oh, this is getting clickbaity. We're already 2 minutes in, where's all the evil stuff? Well, for one, he married his stepsister as a power move, which is gross, but not evil. Since the relationship was void of any real love, Nero started poking around in other women's hoo-has, one of which was Poppaea Sabina, a local town babe who was already married. Well, Nero pops Poppaea and puts a baby in her belly. This little stunt ticked off his mom, who was trying to maximize power through having a mentally stable emperor's son. Since Nero didn't think that his mom's attitude was very cash money of her, he had her assassinated, but made it look like an accident. This is regarded as the turning point in Nero's reign, and when all the ancient shit started to hit the ancient fan. He began going a bit kill happy. Next, he divorced his stepsister, had her exiled, killed, and took her head as a trophy, apparently under Poppaea's influence. But not to worry, Nero did a 360, turned around, and forward smashed Poppaea and their unborn child off stage. That's one problem taken care of. Nero went unhinged. He had several close friends and political rivals murdered, had a former slave castrated, then married him, and even had a senator murdered just because his expressions were too boring. Oh, would you look at that? I'm dying now. Okay. But Nero's crowning moment in history comes in the year 64, where he allegedly started a small fire in a suspiciously flammable merchant shop. According to some sources, Nero wanted to make way for a newer, more elegant, and ornate palace. And you know what they say, in order to make an omelet, you have to burn down your city. About 71% of Rome was destroyed in the Great Fire in 64 AD. There's rumors that Nero shredded on the fiddle or lute during all this, but there's no actual proof of that claim. But like, could you imagine? Eventually, Nero's frequent and dangerously wacky antics forced the Senate to declare him a public enemy. But Nero said that he wouldn't be taken alive. And he wasn't. He went from 0 to 0 by slamming a knife into his own neck, thus ending his 13-year reign. Talk about a Nero-death experience. You may not think it by looking at him, but this tall glass of lukewarm pond water was once the most influential and feared kings in Europe in the late 1400s. This is Ferdinand I of Naples, aka Ferrante. He was the illegitimate son of King Alfonso the Magnanimous of Aragon. Not Aragorn. Aragon is over in Spain. Naples is over in Italy. Geography. When Alfonso left this mortal coil, Ferdinand inherited the crown at Naples at the age of 35. Now listen, if you're gonna control a kingdom, seldom do kind kings succeed. Though he did bring about 20 years of peace and prosperity to his own kingdom, he was cruel and vile to his enemies, which, I mean, makes sense. You can't conquer with forgiveness and love, you would just get conquered yourself. That being the case, Ferdinand got a reputation for being rather ruthless. Basically, if you crossed the guy or got on his bad side, you were marked for an unpleasant death. An example of this was early on in his reign in 1462 when several nobles led a revolt against him, trying to put some ham-hock of a human on the throne instead. But Ferdinand put a swift end to that gaggle of rabble-rousers and the nobles were put in the corner. After many years of keeping his enemies in check, the Ottoman Empire decided it was time to do Ottoman Empire things and invaded Naples in 1480. The southeast region of Salento fell to the Furniture Empire after a few weeks. This caused Ferdinand to panic and declare that everyone should be all hands on deck to fill the kingdom's coffers to fight back the invading Ottomans, and were eventually successful. But the heavy tax burdens pissed off the no-good, unthankful nobles. They led yet another rebellion against Ferdinand, to which he said, Okay. And seized their property and wealth. The nobles gave up yet again, but Ferdinand wanted to put an end to this once and for all. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you're fucking dead. So Ferdinand set up a meeting to grant the rebels amnesty and forgiveness. At said meeting, a deal was struck and the rebels were quickly forgiven, and also quickly murdered. As a warning to any future conspirators, King Ferdinand had their bodies mummified, stuffed, dressed, and put on display in what he called his Black Museum. Listen here, Ferdinand, I think some things need to change around here. Oh, really? Whew, you know, you're doing such a good job as king. Excuse me while I go and unshit my pants. Ferdinand eventually died of butthole cancer, and Naples fell to the French soon after. Now the title lame here isn't what you think it is. Instead of being lame like some dumb nerd, Timur was lame in the sense of being disabled. While committing casual sheep theft, as children do, young Timur took an arrow to the knee and an arrow to the hand, which caused lifelong injury. But do you think being reduced down to the usefulness of a cup of tapioca pudding is going to stop this future conquering warlord? Definitely not. In fact, little Timur grew up to be an extremely cruel but highly intelligent and effective military tactician. Through his efforts, the Turco-Mongol warlord conquered most of Western and Central Asia, Caucasia, Persia, the Middle East, and parts of South Asia and Eastern Europe by 1404, all while forming an empire to call his own, the Timurid Empire. Not bad for running on a 50% limb deficit. During his conquests, he spread destruction and terror almost everywhere he went, because that's kind of what conquerors do. Remember, real power is taken, not given. Throughout these campaigns, Timur's actions gained him quite an infamous reputation, placing him amongst other horrifying legends. One such action was the massacre of Isfahan. Formerly a Persian city, Isfahan was a flourishing hub of art, medicine, music, philosophy, and architecture, which meant it had wealth. A thriving city is great and all, but when you have no army to defend it, you're basically just begging for a pillaging. Oh no, I hope no one takes my hard-earned money. Ugh, my coins are just spilling out. Please don't plunder me pockets. Is this a sexual thing? It could be. So with little to no defense in place, Timur waltzed right in and was all, this is mine now. And Isfahan was all, fair enough, surrendering immediately. As an act of mercy, Timur spared the population, did some light looting, and left some soldiers in command as he went on his next conquest. Well, a few young hooligans decided to be heroes and murdered Timur's soldiers. Bad move. Timur caught wind of this and immediately hightailed it back to Isfahan. In a completely level-headed and reasonable response, he ordered the slaughter of every man, woman, and child in the city. He gave each of his soldiers a quota of heads to bring him. If they failed to collect the craniums, they would lose their own noggins to add to the count. One by one, each citizen was cut down. Almost the entire population of 100,000 people, including all livestock, were murdered. Piles of skulls were scattered around the city as testaments to the horrific act. Look, taking your revenge against those who directly defied you is one thing, but when tens of thousands of innocent civilians become collateral damage to your blind wrath, that's when things cross over into evil territory. One surviving prisoner stated that Timur, quote, ordered the women and children to be taken to a plain outside the city, and ordered the children under 7 years of age to be placed apart, and ordered his people to ride over these same children. When his counselors and the mothers of the children saw this, they fell at his feet and begged that he would not kill them. He would not listen, and ordered that they should be ridden over. But none would be the first to do so. He got angry and rode himself among them, and said, "Now I should like to see, who will not ride after me?" Then they were obliged to ride over the children, and they were all trampled upon. There were 7,000. Yeah, Timur was a pretty bad dude, and that's really just one example of his many atrocities. By the time of his death in 1405, it is estimated that Timur's conquest caused the death of over 17 million people, which was about 5% of the world's population at the time. Pretty solid kill streak. The Xia dynasty, the very first dynasty in ancient China, is estimated to have been founded around 2070 BC and remained in power for several hundreds of years, until this guy showed up. King Jie was the last ruler of the Xia dynasty, which most certainly means that he royally fudged up in some shape or form. So what happened? Not surprisingly, GA had a reputation as a cruel tyrant. He was the big cheese around these parts, and he wanted everyone to know that at all times. But you could argue that GA was ahead of his time, because instead of focusing on ways to better his empire, like any good emperor would, he only sought ways to make life better for himself and his closest buddies, like modern politicians. He also loved spending money. Tons of it. He would drain the kingdom's coffers on frivolous activities like luxurious palace upgrades, endless entertainment, and smashing some gash with the royal concubines. When he ran out of money, he would either raise taxes to continue to fund his lifestyle, or randomly invade small neighboring towns to relieve them of their hard-earned money and their women. On one particularly lucrative expedition, GA decided to ravage the local Yushi clan. Open up, Yushi, I know you're in there. Oh, sorry. Wrong clan. There we go. The Yushi clan didn't want to put up a fight because they knew they would get their shit kicked in, so they instantly surrendered. As you can see, they were pretty smart. The clan offered up a substantial bounty of riches for King GA to hit the road. But since the king had a boner for spilling blood, he felt flaccid and defeated by an enemy who quickly gave up without a fight. Before King GA could act, the chief of the Yushi clan offered one more prize. A beautiful woman by the name of Moshi. Enamored by her obvious beauty, King GA swiftly accepted the offer.
I love you.
GA became unhealthily obsessed with Moshi, trying anything and everything to please her. He once had servants dig a lake and fill it with wine so the couple could bathe, drink, and flop around on and in each other. I mean, the lake was just full of completely disgusting fluids. Now that it was properly flavored, 3,000 men were then commanded to drink the lake dry. They drowned. After learning that his nearest, dearest, darlingest love weirdly enjoyed the ASMR pleasures of tearing silk, he demanded that the finest silks from the farthest reaches of the kingdom be brought before him so he could rip them for her. All of these dumbass endeavors continued to clear out the kingdom's already scant reserves, so it was time to fundraise. Okay fellas, taxes are going up again. What the fuck, GA? We can't afford to live like this. You don't understand, I'm this close to getting her to notice me. Stop being a simp. Alright, that guy, someone kill that guy. You're still a simp, you know. I know. Basically, over the next several years, all the pissed off and neglected subjects and neighbors started feeling pissed off and neglected, so they turned their attention to a newer, cooler guy. Instead of GA of Xia, now they wanted Tang of Shang. How funny is that? After many years of gaining political power and support around the country, Tang of Shang built an army, revolted, and eventually defeated and captured King Jie, stripping him of his kingship. Around 1600 BC, the Xia dynasty had fallen. After about 500 years of rule, Jie eventually died of natural causes as a penniless commoner. Evil can be subjective. What could be viewed as an act of evil by one group may be celebrated and revered by another. For instance, Vlad the Impaler's cruel acts of, well, impaling 20,000 people may be seen as wicked and sadistic by most, but to Romanians, he's seen as a hero because he defended his homeland from the invading Ottoman Empire. But then there's just completely unjustifiable evil assholes, like King Leopold II of Belgium. What do you think of when you think of Belgium? Waffles? Chocolate? Well, how about indigenous genocide? Yeah, in case you didn't know, the Belgian crown was once in possession of one of, if not the, bloodiest European colonies in African history. At the Berlin Conference in 1884, King Leopold II sought to expand his fortune by staking claim to the Congo, over 900,000 square miles of African rainforest in the present-day Democratic Republic of the Congo. To sweeten the deal, Leo formed the International African Association under the guise that it was for humanitarian and philanthropic purposes. Also to establish free trade between the European countries, which was the real selling point. With that, the other colonizing European countries of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the United Kingdom welcomed Belgium's claim to the land, and King Leopold II was now the sole owner of the ironically named Congo Free State. But there was nothing free about it. King Leo's only interest was to extract as much resources and wealth from the land by any means necessary. In order to do that, he needed manpower. So he forced new laws on the Congolese chieftains to implement within their own communities. Those who resisted were swiftly eradicated by other Congolese communities who were backed by the Belgian crown. Initial collection and trade of precious ivory exports weren't the best for profit margins, so not as much money was being made as expected, causing the colony to fall into massive debt. But with the invention and development of automobiles in the late 1800s, the demand for tires shot through the thatched roof. In order to make tires, you need rubber. Lots of rubber. Where does rubber come from? Rubber trees. And boy, let me tell you that the Congo had some rubber trees. After establishing his own personal African army called the Force Publique to enforce rule, King Leo extracted a fortune through blood. Millions of Congolese natives were enslaved and forced to harvest and process rubber from the Congo with the main goal of maximizing production at all costs. Those who were unable to meet a labor quota were sometimes murdered on the spot. Those who refused to work were savagely beaten with their villages raided and destroyed. This system, called the Red Rubber System, led to the utter collapse of the Congolese economy and culture. It should be noted that King Leo never stepped foot in the Congo himself. He left all of his dirty work to hand-picked Belgian officials who ruled as they pleased, often contributing their own atrocities against the native people. One particularly nasty official was Leon Fiebes. He was notorious for punishing underperforming slaves by having their hands cut off. He claimed that it was a way to settle the debt of labor owed to him. The Force Publique soldiers were in charge of collecting these debts, and they were even rewarded for the amount of hands they could collect. With that mentality, they would often resort to cutting the hands off of working slaves to cheat the system. This actually ended up pissing the king off because how the hell are slaves supposed to work with no hands? There were several other issues that plagued the Congo as a direct result of Belgian brutality. All of the development and forced labor caused the vast majority of farming to come to a dead halt, leading to extreme famine and even more deaths. Children who were orphaned during the colonization were kidnapped and forced into Catholic schools where they would learn to work or be soldiers. Fatal diseases ran rampant through the Congo, including smallpox, amoebic dysentery, and the parasitic trypanosomiasis, also called the sleeping sickness, which caused mass insomnia and painful muscle spasms. Through the culmination of these atrocities, historians estimate that roughly 5 to 10 million Congolese people lost their lives during Belgium's reign over the Congo from 1885 to 1908. Thanks to missionaries who secretly documented these atrocities, the public was informed of the horrors of the Congo. The Belgian public, who had no knowledge of these actions, caused an uproar. After much public outcry around the world, including famous writers like Mark Twain and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Belgian parliament forced King Leopold II to cede the Congo Free State to Belgium itself in 1908, but not before he could destroy any and all documented evidence of his wrongdoings that he could find. The Congo Free State was changed to the Belgian Congo, then the Republic of the Congo, then the Democratic Republic of the Congo, since its western neighbor had the same name. King Leopold died a year later in 1909, and the public dunked on his funeral with loud booing and heckling. Even today, many Belgians are ashamed of their late monarch's atrocious behavior and demonstration of how evil a human could be.